In the winter of 1873 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin whispers swept through the German immigrant community about 11-year-old Emma Richter, a pale, quiet child who stunned everyone with her strange talents. She could instantly tell the day of the week for any date in history, repeat entire conversations word for word after hearing them just once, and count the exact number of steps between any two buildings in her neighborhood. What today might be seen as an extraordinary neurological gift was then taken as either a divine sign or a dark curse. When Emma began to use these abilities to reveal secrets, predict fatal accidents, and speak aloud details of crimes that no living soul should know, the wonder turned to fear. By spring, 3 men lay dead, a family had vanished overnight, and Emma herself disappeared, leaving behind only a leather journal filled with cryptic numbers that no one dared to decode. Before diving deeper into the haunting story of Emma Richter and the darkness she uncovered in Milwaukee's German Quarter, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring chilling historical mysteries to life every week, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Stories like these happened in towns just like yours, closer to home than you might ever imagine. What no one in Brewery Town realized was that Emma's strange gift would unravel a tangle of lies, betrayals, and murders that had been festering for nearly a decade, and that her calculating mind would soon become the community's worst nightmare. In 1873, Milwaukee's German Quarter was alive with red brick breweries, wooden houses, and the constant blend of German and English voices in the crisp Wisconsin air. This community of nearly 8,000 had built their own little Bavaria along Lake Michigan, complete with beer gardens, bakeries, and the rhythms of old world life transplanted to American soil. The men worked in breweries like Schlitz Best and many smaller ones, while their wives tended gardens that grew the same vegetables their grandmothers had planted back in the Rhineland. Heinrich and Greta Richter came from Bavaria in 1861 with dreams of a better life. And their newborn daughter, Emma Heinrich, found steady work as a brewmaster at Kellner Brewery, while Greta earned extra money with laundry and sewing, often working late by candlelight after Emma was asleep in their modest home on Galena Street. In every way, they were an ordinary family, except for their extraordinary daughter. Emma had been born 3 weeks early during their rough Atlantic crossing, so small that the ship's doctor doubted she would survive. But she did, growing into a slight pale girl with enormous gray eyes that absorbed everything around her with unsettling intensity. As a toddler, Emma rarely cried or demanded attention, preferring instead to sit quietly in corners with her wide gray eyes fixed on the world around her, listening and absorbing every detail as though storing it away. By the time she turned 4, her parents realized something about their daughter was not like other children. She could repeat entire conversations she had overheard days earlier, down to the tone and accent of each speaker. She counted everything: the stitches in her mother's embroidery, the steps from their door to the bakery, and the seconds between the brewery whistles that marked the start and end of the workday. When Heinrich began teaching her simple arithmetic, she took to it with an almost frightening speed, solving problems in her head before he could finish writing them down. At first, the German community saw Emma's strange gift with a mixture of pride and unease. Old Mrs. Brennan, who loved to retell the witch trial stories of her grandmother, would quickly cross herself whenever Emma's unblinking gaze landed on her, while Father Koller, the sturdy Bavarian priest who served the little parish, declared that Emma's gifts were a sign from God, a blessing meant to show their community that heaven had chosen one of their own. Then came the winter of 1872. One of the harshest anyone could remember, when the cold froze Lake Michigan solid, and brewery workers gathered around coal stoves with their breath fogging the air even indoors, fought to keep food on the table and their children warm. It was during that long, bitter winter that Emma's gift began to shift into something more unsettling. She developed a habit of sitting for hours at the small kitchen window, watching her neighbors with the same focus she brought to numbers, and soon she began to see patterns everywhere, not only in counting steps, but in people's behavior. Mr. Kruger always took exactly 247 steps to the brewery, except on Wednesdays, when he chose a longer route with 284 steps. Mrs. Fisher always hung her laundry in a certain order unless her husband was late at the mill, in which case she changed the sequence entirely. At first, these observations seemed like the harmless quirks of an unusual child. But then Emma began speaking her findings aloud in a way that unsettled every adult who heard her. The shift from curiosity to dread began on a gray February morning in 1873, when Emma sat eating her breakfast quietly while Greta prepared Heinrich's lunch. Without warning, she looked up from her plate and said in a calm, flat voice, "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2. Greta nearly dropped the lunch pail, Emma mined. God, what an awful thing to say. Why would you think that? Her daughter's gaze stayed locked on her face, steady and cold. He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days, she said. Yesterday, he drank 3 times more than usual. His steps were uneven, 251, instead of his normal 244. When people change their patterns by more than 10%, something significant happens. Within 72 hours, Mr. Dietrich's pattern changed by 12%. The calculation is simple. Heinrich, halfway into his heavy coat, froze and stared at her. It was true that Johann Dietrich was a drinker, but no more than half the men in the quarter. That Emma had been counting his steps and watching how much he drank was disturbing enough. That she could calmly predict his death based on those numbers chilled both parents in a way the Wisconsin winter never could. You must not say such things. Such things, Emma, Heinrich said, his voice sharp. It is not right for a child to speak of death. Emma nodded once without a word and went back to eating her porridge. But as she lowered her head, Greta and Heinrich shared a silent, worried glance over her small, pale frame. The Richters were used to their daughter's strange observations, but this felt different, darker and sharper than anything she had ever said before. That afternoon, at exactly 14 minutes past 2, Jan Dietrich collapsed in the malt room of the brewery. The doctor called it heart failure made worse by years of drinking. The men who found him said he had been acting strangely for weeks, drinking more than usual, and carrying himself with a nervousness that seemed to grow heavier by the day. But what truly shook them was the timing. Emma's words had been correct to the very minute. News of the grim prediction ran through the German quarter like smoke from a fast-burning chimney. Some laughed it off as coincidence, but others began whispering about the pale girl with the cold gray eyes, and wondered what else she might know from watching silently through that small kitchen window. By the next Sunday, the Richters could feel the eyes on them when they walked to church, whispers curling behind them like frost. Even Father Koller, who once called Emma's talent a blessing from God, now seemed unsettled. After Mass, Heinrich pulled him aside for advice. But the priest's usual warmth was gone, replaced by something much more serious. "Heinrich, my friend," he said in a thick Bavarian accent, "perhaps Emma should spend less time watching others and more time praying. The Lord gives gifts, but the devil sometimes twists them toward dangerous things." Heinrich went home that evening with those words echoing in his mind. He had never been a superstitious man. His life ruled more by brewing barrels than by faith, but Emma's prediction haunted him. That night, he sat down with his daughter and asked quietly, you know what would happen to Mr. Dietrich? She lifted those wide gray eyes to him and said simply, I watch. I count. I remember. His patterns changed. When a man drinks 37% more alcohol over 17 days while eating 20% less food, his heart cannot keep up. I calculated the most probable time of failure based on his age weight and how he moved. Heinrich felt ice slide through his veins. His little girl was speaking like a doctor or something far worse. But how could you possibly know all of that? I observe everything, Papa, every day, every person, every pattern. Her tone was flat and calm, but there was something in her gaze that made him want to look away. Would you like me to tell you about the other calculations I have made? Heinrich quickly shook his head. He didn't want to know. That night, as the February snow piled against their house and smothered the world in silence, he tucked Emma into bed with a heaviness in his chest. She lay still, her small face pale in the candlelight, while her mind kept working behind those eyes, sorting through everything she had seen and turning it into numbers that no child should ever be thinking about. And as the days turned into weeks after Jan Dietrich's death, the entire German quarter seemed to change. The air was sharper, the glances colder, and in the middle of it all, Emma never stopped watching. Now Heinrich and Greta could no longer watch their daughter without a creeping unease. Every day she sat by the kitchen window with those gray eyes fixed like clockwork on the world outside, tracking every movement with silent precision. The little girl who had once been their pride had become something that filled their hearts with a quiet, constant dread. Life in the German brewing quarter had always been tightly knit. The men depended on one another for steady work, their wives shared the long winters together, and the children ran in packs through the narrow brick streets. But Emma had never been part of that world. While the other children played tag or told stories, she sat apart, counting, calculating, always watching. As that winter gave way to early spring, Greta noticed her daughter's observations taking on a new and troubling depth. Emma no longer merely counted steps or timed whistles. She began to speak in the same calm voice she used for arithmetic of things no child should know. She said that Mrs. Weber met secretly with Mr. Kellner every Tuesday afternoon for 6 weeks, and that the Schneider family buried something wrapped in cloth in their garden every Sunday after church. When Greta asked how she could possibly know such things, Emma answered in the same cold, matter-of-fact way. People think they hide their secrets, but they move in patterns, just like numbers. Mrs. Weber always tells her husband she visits her sister. But I count 127 steps to Mr. Kellner's house instead of 349 to her sister's. The Schneiders bury things 73 centimeters apart in a grid. They believe no one sees them, but I am always watching. That night, Heinrich had heard enough. After Emma was in bed, he spoke gravely to Greta as she sat mending one of his shirts by lamplight. Greta, this must stop. Emma is not acting like a child. This is unnatural. She should not know such things, and she certainly should not speak of them like she is solving a puzzle. Greta's hands trembled over her needle. I am frightened, Heinrich. Not of her, but of what the neighbors are beginning to think. They already crossed the street to avoid us. Father Koller has not visited once since Jan died. Her words proved true only 3 days later. Emma was standing at the kitchen table peeling potatoes when she suddenly stopped and spoke without looking up, her tone steady and precise. Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence. Greta's knife fell from her hands. Emma, no, you must not say such things. But Emma continued as calmly as if she were reciting numbers from her lessons. Mrs. Weber has been arriving at the brewery 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 weeks. Mr. Kellner stays 33 minutes later every day. Tomorrow, Mr. Weber will return from his delivery route 47 minutes early because his horse is going lame. I have been watching the way she walks for 11 days. When Greta stared in shock, Emma explained further. On March 1st, the horse favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today, it was 68. Tomorrow, it will slow him enough to bring him home early. That convergence of variables makes discovery certain. Heinrich, standing silently in the doorway, felt his stomach turn to ice. His daughter wasn't just watching her neighbors, she was predicting their futures with a terrifying accuracy. The next day unfolded just as she said. Wilhelm Weber came home early and found his wife Anna with brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The fight that followed left Kellner with a broken nose and cracked ribs, and Anna beaten so badly, Dr. Mueller had to be called. Every detail had happened exactly the way Emma had foretold. The scandal between Anna Weber and Ernst Kellner tore through the German community like a storm. But what unsettled everyone more than the affair itself was the realization that Emma Richter had predicted it exactly as it happened. People whispered that the pale little girl had first foretold Jan Dietrich's death and now had seen this disgrace coming as well. She sat at her kitchen window like a watchful ghost, always looking, always counting, always knowing. The Richter family quickly became outsiders in a place that had once been their home. Friends avoided them. In church, children were warned not to play near their house, and even the shopkeepers served Greta briskly and with as few words as possible. At the brewery, Heinrich felt the change too. The other men no longer joked with him, and Kellner, still limping from his broken ribs, made sure that everyone knew the Richters were no longer welcome at company gatherings. Emma seemed untouched by it all. Day after day, she sat with her leather-bound journal filling its pages with numbers, charts, and patterns only she seemed to understand. What her parents glimpsed inside those pages chilled them sequences of human behavior maps of the neighborhood, marked with cryptic symbols and columns of figures that made no sense to anyone else. As winter thawed into spring, Heinrich began thinking about leaving Milwaukee behind, desperate to escape the stares, the whispers, and most of all, the fear of his own daughter's terrible accuracy. But Emma was not done. The worst, it seemed, was still coming. By April, her journal had grown thick and heavy, and her calculations more complex than ever. It was no longer just counting steps or predicting small events. She was charting the lives of everyone around her. Her strange isolation seemed to make her sharper. With no friends, no distractions, she studied everything and everyone with even greater intensity. Fear of Emma had taken on a more open form by now. Children crossed the street rather than walk past the Richter house. Shopkeepers kept their conversations short. Even Father Koller kept his distance, only speaking to the family during formal services. It was then that Dr. Friedrich Müller, the German quarters physician, decided he had to see the child himself. Unlike the neighbors, he was curious rather than afraid. Having studied medicine in Berlin, he had heard of rare cases of extraordinary mental ability. When Heinrich, worn down by worry, came to him for advice, Dr. Müller offered to examine Emma. On a rainy Thursday morning in his small office above the Water Street Pharmacy, he questioned her while she sat calm and still, her gray eyes never leaving his face. "Your father tells me you can predict when certain events will happen. "Can you explain to me how you do this?" She answered without hesitation. "I observe patterns and calculate probabilities based on established behavioral data. People believe their choices are random, but they follow mathematical sequences. When I have enough data points, I can predict what they will do." Dr. Muller, intrigued, leaned forward. "Can you give me an example?" Emma opened her journal and turned the pages until she found the one she wanted. Mrs. Brennan believes she hides her actions, but the pattern is obvious. Every Tuesday and Friday for 8 weeks, she has walked to the church at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. She does not enter the church. She goes to the rectory and remains there for precisely 43 minutes. Father Kerr's own pattern has changed. He buys extra candles and wine, and his evening prayers have lengthened by an average of 17 minutes on Tuesdays and Fridays. The correlation is statistically significant. Muller felt his chest tighten as he realized what she was suggesting about the widow and the priest. The accusation itself was scandalous enough, but it was the way she had uncovered it with nothing but observation, calculation, and a quiet, relentless certainty that left him shaken when Dr. Muller asked Emma how long she had been watching people in this way. She answered without hesitation, always. "Since I was very small, but I only began making calculations when I learned mathematics." The patterns became clearer then. After the examination, the doctor pulled Heinrich and Greta aside and spoke quietly. "Your daughter's mind does not work like other children," he said. "She processes information in ways that are almost mechanical. This is a neurological condition, in my opinion. Not anything supernatural. But even the rational voice of science could not calm the creeping dread that followed. Emma, everywhere. 2 days after the examination, Emma gave another of her terrifyingly precise warnings. "There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening," she said. "It will begin at 8:47, and it will spread to 3 nearby buildings before the fire brigade can stop it. Mr. Zimmerman will not live to escape." Heinrich felt his chest tighten. "Emma, you must stop talking this way. How could you know about a fire?" Emma calmly opened her journal. "Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. I saw him buy both in amounts that exceed normal use. His wife left for Chicago yesterday, which is the same pattern wives follow before domestic disasters. The chimney of their house is damaged. I calculated this from the angle of the smoke and the way the soot has settled. The probability of fire is 93%. Greta's hands shook as she listened, and tears filled her eyes. The cold way her daughter spoke, as if these tragedies were just numbers and not lives, frightened her more deeply than anything else could. Heinrich made a desperate choice. He would warn Franz Zimmerman, maybe stop the disaster and show that his daughter's strange gift could be turned to good. He found Zimmerman at the brewery late on Saturday. The man was drunk and reeking of the oily whiskey mixture. When Heinrich told him about Emma's prediction, Zimmerman laughed cruelly and made jokes about the devil, child who thinks she knows everything. But something about Heinrich's urgency must have struck him, because he muttered that he would be careful with the lamps. The next evening, a warm, dry wind swept through the quarter, and at 8:47, flames burst from the Zimmerman house. The fire spread with shocking speed to 3 other houses before the volunteer brigade could get it under control. When the embers cooled, Franz Zimmerman's body was found in his kitchen where he had fallen, trying to beat back the blaze with his bare hands. Emma's prediction had been correct to the minute. Everyone in the German quarter knew that Heinrich had tried to warn Zimmerman, and soon everyone also knew that Emma had said exactly when and how it would happen. Fear that had once been whispered became something open and cold. No one came near the Richter family anymore, and yet Emma seemed untouched by the ruin around her. To her, the fire was just another point of data. She wrote it down in her journal, noting the perfect accuracy of her calculations, adjusting her models, and moving on to the next patterns. As the community tried to shelter the displaced families and rebuild what the fire had destroyed, the fear of Emma became absolute. The pale 11-year-old with the leather notebook no longer seemed like a curious child to them, but something else entirely. Something they no longer dared to speak of out loud. Heinrich's life at the brewery had become unbearable. Men who had once been his friends now avoided his eyes. Conversations ended abruptly when he entered a room, and Ernst Kellner, still nursing his broken ribs, made sure that the Richters knew they were no longer welcome at any company gatherings. The uncanny precision of Emma's predictions had turned their once curious little girl into something the entire community feared, but dared not name. Through it all, Emma seemed blind to the cold stares and silence that followed them everywhere. She continued her routine as if nothing had changed, sitting for hours at the kitchen window and filling page after page of her leather journal. What she wrote was no longer simple lists or numbers. She was creating strange probability matrices, following the movements of entire families, calculating dozens of variables at once, and extending her predictions far into the future. Greta could not bring herself to look at the journal anymore. She was terrified of what she might see, whether her daughter had begun making predictions about their own family, their neighbors, or tragedies still to come. The little girl who had once been her greatest joy had become something that made her stomach clench with fear. Emma's calm discussions of disaster, her lack of any human reaction to pain or shame, her absolute certainty. All of it felt like something essential in her had broken. The breaking point came late on a Tuesday morning in April. Emma sat in her usual spot by the kitchen window, her gray eyes sweeping the street as steadily as a pendulum, when she suddenly turned to her mother. "Mama, there is something wrong with the pattern today." Greta, kneading bread at the table, felt her hands tremble. "What do you mean, Emma?" The girl flipped through her journal, the pages filled with neat columns of figures. "For 11 weeks, Mrs. Brennan has walked to the rectory at exactly 3:15. Today she left her house at 2:47 and went toward the river instead. Her steps are shorter by 12% and her breathing uneven. This indicates severe emotional distress." Greta's mouth went dry. "Emma, you must not say such terrible things. Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never." "The probability is 87%, Emma said without pause. People who make sudden changes to long-established patterns while showing these signs usually act within 4 hours. Mrs. Brennan's pattern changed 43 minutes ago. Greta dropped the dough on the table as panic surged through her. She ran to the garden where Heinrich was working the soil, trying to find some peace in the ordinary rhythm of planting. "Heinrich, you must come quickly. Emma says Mrs. Brennan is going to harm herself. We must stop her." He saw the fear in her eyes and felt the same cold dread that had become their constant companion since winter. Together they hurried inside. Emma was still by the window, making new notes in her journal as if documenting an experiment. "Emma, tell me exactly what you observed about Mrs. Brennan," Heinrich said. Slowly she looked up, her wide gray eyes clear and unblinking. She left her usual Tuesday route 28 minutes early, and the way she walked showed clear signs of severe emotional distress. Based on all previous patterns, the probability of self-harm was 87%, with the most likely time between 5 and 7 o'clock that evening. Heinrich listened to Emma's flat explanation, and for the first time, he acted on it without question. He left the house at once and followed the direction Emma had given him, toward the river. There he found Margaret Brennan standing alone on the dock, staring down into the black water with her shoulders shaking. Heinrich approached slowly. "Mrs. Brennan," he called gently. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, her eyes red and swollen. "What are you doing here, Heinrich?" "I was worried about you," he said softly. "You have seemed troubled." Margaret's voice broke. "I cannot bear it anymore. The shame, the whispers. Everyone knows about my weakness. Father Collar says it is sin. But I cannot stop what I feel for him. Better to end it than to live with this disgrace." In that moment, Heinrich understood with terrible clarity that everything Emma had observed about Mrs. Brennan and the priest had been true. He spent the next 2 hours talking to the despairing widow, persuading her that scandal and judgment were not worth her life and that gossip fades faster than it feels. When he finally returned home, exhausted, he found Emma at the table finishing an entry in her journal. "Mrs. Brennan did not follow through," she said calmly. "The intervention changed the probability calculation. I will need to adjust my variables for future predictions involving outside interference." Heinrich stared at his daughter in silence. She had seen a suicide attempt before it happened, predicted it with uncanny precision, and then treated the fact he had saved a life as nothing more than a new line in her data. The horror that filled him in that moment was like nothing he had ever known. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her narrow bed, Greta and Heinrich sat in the dim kitchen and made the decision they had been too frightened to face before. They could not stay in Milwaukee. The quarter had become a prison built from fear, suspicion, and Emma's terrible gift. Worse than that was the growing certainty that their daughter's extraordinary mind was drifting further and further from any sense of human feeling. She saw patterns and probabilities where others felt pain and love and guilt. They began quietly to plan an escape to find a place where Emma might live, unmarked by fear, a place where her strange mind might turn to something other than tragedy. Yet as Heinrich lay awake listening to the settling creak of their small house, he felt sure of one thing. The patterns Emma tracked had already uncovered secrets far more dangerous than the ones she had spoken aloud. And leaving Milwaukee might not be enough to escape them. The precision of Emma's observations, the emotionless way she spoke of disaster, and the deepening complexity of her notebooks made it clear that she had been watching and recording far more than anyone suspected. And she had not stopped. Her mind was still calculating. The revelation that would tear open the darkest secret of Milwaukee's German Quarter came on the morning of May 1st, 1873. By then, her notebooks were filled with densely packed charts that mapped every movement, every deviation, and every conversation of nearly every adult in the neighborhood. Heinrich and Greta had already begun quietly packing, hoping to leave Wisconsin before Emma's next prediction could bring ruin to more families. But that morning, as soft spring sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Emma looked up from her journal with those gray, unblinking eyes and said, "Papa, I need to show you something. My calculations have revealed a pattern that explains everything." Heinrich, his hands shaking, sat down across from her, dreading what he was about to hear. Emma turned the pages to a section crowded with charts, maps, and long strings of numbers that looked nothing like a child's work. "For the past 26 months," she began, "I've been observing and recording the behavior of 43 adults in our community. At first, I thought these patterns were unrelated. But once I analyzed the data over time, I found correlations that reveal organized criminal activity." Heinrich felt his mouth go dry. "Emma," What are you talking about? She pointed to a map of the German quarter marked with fine lines, roots and symbols. 7 men have been meeting in secret every Wednesday night at midnight in the basement of Kellner's brewery. I calculated their movements based on changes in their usual habits, discrepancies in the times they claim to be working late, and the routes they take to avoid being seen. Her finger traced a pattern of paths on the map. Mr. Steinberg always tells his wife he is staying late at the mill, but he leaves at the exact same time as the others and takes the side streets to the brewery. This has been consistent for 26 months, with only 3 exceptions when illness or family emergencies kept them away. Heinrich stared at the names written neatly beside the routes and felt his stomach twist. Wilhelm Weber Franz Kellner, Ernst's brother Hans Zimmermann, Franz's cousin Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Gustav Wolf, and Hermann Kruger. Emma, how can you possibly know all this? I watch everything, Papa. Every night, every movement, every change in routine. She flipped to another page filled with rows of figures. But the meetings are not the most important part. My calculations show that these 7 men have been stealing systematically from the breweries. The total value of the theft is approximately $47,000 over the last 26 months. The number made Heinrich feel faint. That was a fortune, more money than most families in their community would see in an entire lifetime. How can you possibly know this? He whispered. Emma's answer came with the same steady calm that had chilled him so many times before. I noticed that the production numbers reported by the breweries do not match the actual output I calculated by counting the number of barrels, the amount of grain and hops purchased, the transport wagons, and the waste disposal. The differences revealed a pattern of theft. Once I had the pattern, I identified the men who created it. Emma's thin finger traced the columns of numbers and notes, showing how every one of the 7 men had begun spending beyond their means. Mr. Weber had bought new furniture worth $300. Mr. Steinberg had been sending money and packages to relatives in Germany, 12 large parcels over the past months, none of which fit the size of ordinary correspondence. Each man showed similar signs of unexplained wealth, and every pattern converged on the same conclusion. Heinrich felt sick as he realized that what he was holding was not just a child's notebook, but evidence of a criminal conspiracy mapped out by an 11-year-old's relentless observation. But Emma was not finished. The thefts were not random, she said in her flat, careful tone. They required inside knowledge of brewery security and bookkeeping. When I cross-checked all movement patterns, the data pointed to Ernst Kellner himself as the organizer. The word struck Heinrich like a blow. Kellner, the man who had been shutting them out, who had marked their family as outcasts, was at the center of it all. Emma's evidence laid out in perfect detail was undeniable. 26 months of meetings, discrepancies in brewing records, and a sum of $47,000 stolen. Papa, are you sure about this? Heinrich asked, his voice tight. Emma opened her journal once more. The probability is 96%, and there is more. Kellner knows I see him. 3 weeks ago, he stood outside our house twice, for 17 minutes each time. He's calculating whether I know his secret. That means we are in danger. If I continue to observe, they will act against us. My calculations show an 84% chance they will harm us within the next 72 hours. The finality of her tone left no room for doubt. This was not another distant tragedy. This was a prediction about their own survival. That evening, Heinrich acted. Clutching Emma's journal, he went to Dr. Muller under cover of night and showed him everything. The physician, already shaken by Emma's strange abilities, read through the neat, relentless pages. "If this is true," he whispered, "this is the largest theft operation in Milwaukee's history. And if Kellner suspects your daughter knows, you must leave at once." By midnight, Dr. Mutzler had used his contacts to secure a job for Hinrich at a brewery far away in Minnesota. It would be their escape and their cover. That night, as they loaded their few belongings into Muller's wagon, Emma stood silent beside them, her gray eyes catching every shadow. Before Hinrich lifted her inside, she spoke one last time. "Papa, in about 6 months, the theft will be discovered by others. Kellner will be caught, but 3 of the 7 men will die before the investigation ends. It is already decided." 6 months later, her prediction came true. A federal investigation shattered the theft ring. Ernst Kellner was arrested and convicted, and 3 of his accomplices died in circumstances no one ever fully explained. But on that dark night in May 1873, as the wagon rolled away from the German quarter, and the only home they had ever known, Hinrich thought only of the terrible gift that had saved their lives, and in the same breath destroyed them. The Richter family disappeared from Milwaukee in the quiet hours before dawn on May 2nd, 1873, leaving behind only rumors, frightened speculation, and a void no one could explain. Dr. Muller told the curious that an urgent summons had called them back to Bavaria, but those who searched for ship records found nothing. The truth, carefully hidden, was that Hinrich, Greta, and Emma had fled west under Muller's protection, starting over in the small town of New Ulm, Minnesota. Muller had sworn to keep their destination secret, knowing that Emma's unusual gift would forever attract danger from anyone whose secret she uncovered. In New Ulm, the family tried to stitch together an ordinary life. Hinrich returned to brewery work, a rhythm that steadied him after months of fear. Greta slowly rebuilt the routines of home that Milwaukee had stripped away. But Emma did not change. She still spent hours quietly observing, charting, and calculating the invisible patterns of human behavior, her journals filling with numbers as quickly as ever. Muller kept in touch through letters, and in time he told of a new figure in Emma's life. Dr. Hermann Weiss, a German-born mathematics professor at a nearby college. Unlike those who had feared her, Weiss saw Emma's gift as something that could be understood, and he encouraged her to channel her strange precision into something more constructive than prediction. In November 1873, Muller received a letter from Hinrich containing Emma's final note about Milwaukee. Every detail of her prophecy had unfolded exactly as she said it would. Federal agents had uncovered Ernst Kellner's theft ring, exposing a network of fraud that siphoned over $50,000 from the city's breweries. Kellner was arrested and convicted. Wilhelm Weber, once Kellner's right hand, was found dead. His death ruled a suicide, though many whispered otherwise. Otto Steinberg died weeks later in what was described as a drunken fall. And Hermann Kruger collapsed from a sudden heart attack that, according to Muller, resembled poisoning more than natural illness. Emma had seen it all from hundreds of miles away, months before it happened. The scandal tore through the German quarter, but in its aftermath, the neighborhood slowly rebuilt itself. The empty houses left by death and exile were filled by new families. The breweries worked under closer watch. Life began bit by bit to resemble the familiar. But Emma's name remained like a ghost whispered in the alleys and doorways. Parents told her story to frighten their children into obedience, and the old folk used it to warn of the dangers that come with knowing too much. Beneath the polite surface of the quarter, there was always the lingering thought that somewhere out there, the pale girl with the gray eyes was still watching. Father Collar, who had once praised Emma as touched by the divine, admitted to Dr. Mueller that she had shaken his faith more than any sin he had ever confessed. Some knowledge, he said, should not belong to human minds, and he could not decide whether Emma's gift had been a miracle or a curse upon their community. If this tale has unsettled you, you are not alone. Stories like this are why we continue to uncover the darkest mysteries of America's past. Share this with someone who loves true history wrapped in shadows, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of the most disturbing cases history has to offer. Mueller's final letter to the Richters, sent in the spring of 1874, carried a last piece of news. Milwaukee had returned to something like normal. But the story of Emma Richter had become a legend, and during the federal inquiry into the brewery theft, investigators had stumbled on a new secret one so dark that even from afar, Mueller warned that Emma's calculations may not yet be done. Federal investigators reviewing the evidence left behind in Milwaukee made an astonishing discovery about Emma's journal. What Heinrich had handed to Dr. Mueller as proof of a theft conspiracy turned out to be something far more complex. Page after page revealed that Emma had been tracking not just the movements of 7 men, but the entire German immigrant community. Her neat, relentless columns of numbers mapped the daily lives of dozens of families, recording every deviation in their habits and building detailed profiles that predicted future behavior with a precision that left hardened investigators shaken. In a letter written months later, Dr. Mueller described the effect the journal had on federal agents. "Your daughter's mind works in ways that professional investigators might envy," he wrote. "But I confess that I am grateful she is far from Milwaukee. Her calculations are a kind of knowledge I am not sure any community is ready to live with." The agents were impressed, but deeply disturbed by how thoroughly she had dissected the secret lives of her neighbors and by how many of her predictions proved accurate, even before they left her home. The final trace of Emma in the historical record comes not from a police file, but from an entry in the archives of New Ulm College in 1875. Professor Hermann Weiss noted that his exceptional young pupil possessed an unparalleled ability for statistical analysis and behavioral modeling. The note ends simply, "Family relocating. Student withdrawn." After that, Emma Richter disappears from history as completely as she vanished from Milwaukee on that dark night in May 1873. What became of the girl with the calculating gray eyes remains a mystery. Some historians believe that families who realized their children had such unusual gifts went to great lengths to keep them hidden, fearing both scientific exploitation and the wrath of those who would call such abilities unnatural. Emma's case is one of the very few in which such skills were documented with enough detail to glimpse their potential and their danger. Her story stands as a chilling example of how extraordinary mental abilities can unsettle even the most close-knit communities. In 1873, people thought of her as blessed or cursed, a child touched by heaven or haunted by the devil. Today, science understands that rare neurological conditions, forms of savant syndrome, certain expressions of autism, or unique cognitive wiring can produce minds that absorb and process information in ways that seem supernatural to those around them. But the larger question remains, just how far did Emma's ability extend? Did she see more than even her parents realized? And if she had lived in our time, what patterns might she have uncovered in the rest of it? What do you think of Emma's story? Was everything revealed, or did her mind hold secrets we will never uncover? If you've ever met someone whose mental abilities seemed beyond explanation, let us know in the comments. If this tale fascinated you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of forgotten mysteries. The case of Emma Richter reminds us that the most chilling truths may not come from ghosts or monsters, but from the power of observation. In a world where we believe we keep our secrets hidden, perhaps the greatest horror is discovering that someone out there has already counted every step we take.